Multimedia content, interactive guidance with your audience, and customized insight on what they need to do to align themselves to this new and complex future. Hi, I'm Jim Carroll. I'm a future trends and disruptive innovation expert. And there is no doubt now that in this global economic crisis and the global pandemic, that we are now in a new and virtual world, but that leadership insight into trends and innovation is more important than ever before. Since this crisis began, I've been working and putting in place a state-of-the-art broadcast studio in my home. My state-of-the-art broadcast studio includes multiple cameras, massive opportunities for special effects, the ability for interactive interviews with a series of guests, text message polls by which we can gauge the insight and attitudes of the individuals in your organization, and interactive Q&A with a global or local audience in this new and very complex virtual world. I can provide so much more than your typical online webinar. I can take your next webinar to the next level with an interactive webinar that will engage and delight your participants in this new world of interactive leadership. And for over 25 years, I have appeared on stage around the world, providing insight to organizations on what they need to do to align themselves to a world in which the future belongs to those who are fast. Organizations like Disney, the World Bank, NASA, and the PGA of America have had me in for my insight on what comes next and what we need to do about it. I'd invite you to reach out to me to have a discussion, and I will bring you into my home broadcast studio to give you a tour of what is possible and how we can take your team forward into this new and complex world in which we need to think big, start small, and scale fast.
Hey, futurist Jim Carroll. Let's talk about reinvention. You know that we're 6 months in from that really horrid date in March when everything went south and we realized that this pandemic was real and the stock market collapsed, and all of a sudden the world in the future was looking extremely difficult. We all struggled in that day, and I determined really on I was going to reinvent myself really fast. And so if you've been following me, you know that's what I've been doing down in this home broadcast studio. And I wanted to give you a bit of a tour of what I've done over the last 6 months, because it's kind of fascinating looking back at where I was and where I am today. But first, let's talk about the issue of reinvention. We have a little bit of a technical flaw happening there. Let's bring that back. This is why you go live, because you never know what is going to happen. I'm in a software community where there are a whole bunch of people who are working with the same software that I'm using. And just over a week and a half ago, this individual, Amanda McDowell, posted this note, hi, I'm new here. I want to go virtual. I've got no idea what to do, where to start, but I'm a teacher and I'm going to be doing distance learning and I want to figure out how to do it. And that too is a story of reinvention. There are people out there who are reinventing themselves for this new world, reinventing their capabilities, reinventing their skills. And she posted this note just the other day that she was now going live with her virtual classroom. Everywhere we look, there are people who are busy reinventing their life and reinventing their reality. Now, I look back at that March day when I came down to my home broadcast studio. I already had a green screen studio, which I was doing for some client event videos, but it was really primitive. I had a monitor, I had 2 lights, I had a computer, but I knew I had to do something to make this real, because I figured I was going to be in the virtual world for quite some time to come. Well, over the weekend, we did a rebuild. We tore it apart. We repainted the thing. I'm now up to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 computers, 5 lights, multiple different cameras. It keeps on changing, it keeps on growing, and I keep enhancing my capabilities so I can do things I haven't done before. Here's a side view of what's happening right now, and just a little bit of the gear which is behind the scenes helping to make this show work. Here's a side view as it happens live in real time. seeing what I'm seeing when I'm taking my insight out to the world. And I'm actually doing client events and gearing up for a bunch of client events in October. And I got to do it all right here. It's fascinating to think about what is involved. Here's a really horrid long shot of what the studio looks like from a long view with a really bad old camera, which I was using in the early days. Look, I started out in this voyage. I had no idea what I was doing. I had no idea of what was involved, but I did know one thing. I needed to reinvent myself. And I needed to reinvent myself fast. I've now adopted the tagline, virtual done right, because I think what I've done here is I've really figured out how to make this format work. And I'm going to take you on a bit of a tour of some of the things I did and saw and learned along the way. And what are you doing here? Live is fun because my mouse is clicking and... What do you learn along the way? Well, the only way to get good at it is go live and have a couple of hiccups. So yes, in the early days, the studio was primitive. I was determined to make it go. And I actually remember that March day when I walked down here, the global market had just collapsed. I was, like everyone else, in a state of anger, fear, panic, worry, concern. And I went and I did a simple little show with a simple little backdrop behind me, a simple little picture of a question. And I spoke to the camera and I was green screening. I was thinking, I've got to go virtual. I've got to try to figure it out. Early in March, I began to explore my creative possibilities. I learned how to try to shake things up a bit in terms of background sets and in terms of colors I could use to make it a little bit more visually appealing. People were already getting zoomed out by that point in time. And I decided what I really needed to do to figure out this virtual format was to go live and do a show. So in mid-March, I started a show disrupting the big disruption. And I remember that very first moment when I walked out on stage here in my basement, butterflies in my stomach because I was going to hit that button to go live. I look back at that first show and it was horrid. It was bad. The lighting was off. My graphics were off. It was a disaster, but it was teaching me something. It was the fact that I could and should and would do this thing. And I actually had a major early win. I ended up in the national news. There's my little green screen over there on the side with a clip about how people were reinventing themselves. And I was on air talking about the fact that I was going to be in this virtual world for some time and I'm going to have to learn everything I could to figure out what I needed to do to accelerate myself into the future. So what the show actually did was it took one of my stage presentations, some video roll from that stage presentation, and it showed some B-roll of me walking down into my very primitive studio and working away. I experimented along the way with a lot of formats. For a time, I was thinking that my pathway forward in the future was simply to run some PowerPoint presentations and stand like I did and flip through with a clicker to go through the bullets. I quickly realized that that wasn't going to work. That wasn't going to cut it. I ran my show for 6 weeks and two things happened. Number one, it was starting to conflict with the arrival of golf season. For my very last show, I was rushing out the door and I wasn't really paying attention. It had run its course. The second thing was my lovely wife watched it and she said, like, what is the purpose? It's really not succeeding. Maybe you should concentrate a little bit more on doing the things you need to build out your virtual business. And so I canned the show. Was it a failure? No. I learned through the experience of what I was doing. And I came to realize that all I've got is this green wall. I began to call it my canvas of creativity because it became the reality for what I needed to do to reinvent myself for the future. What I really wanted to do was I wanted to get beyond the typical Zoom conferences that a lot of speakers were offering. I wanted to have visual content. I wanted to have stage sets. I wanted to have something that was visually compelling with visual content. And for example, I used the story of the Jetsons on stage a lot through my speaking career, where I would get in front of 3,000 people and tell the story of George Jetson and the Jetsons and how the fact is the Jetsons, which appeared in 1962, actually arrived 50 years early. And I used that as a barometer to put in perspective how quickly, hey, futurist Jim Carroll, our future was unfolding. And so one day I did a show which actually ran the Jetsons, and I was really happy with the result. Here's the opening moments. Hey, futurist Jim Carroll. If you've been following me over the years, you know that I've been using the story of the Jetsons a lot to put in perspective that our future is coming at us faster than ever before. Set in the year 2062, much of what we saw in the Jetsons. I realized that what I could do was I could do something which was a little bit compelling, a little bit different, a little bit interesting. But what I also began to learn is that there's these fascinating stage sets with drop-down screens and animations and stuff that could really accelerate my capabilities. So I decided I was going to begin to learn editing programs like DaVinci to add into my skill set to do a little bit more. I realized along the way I was getting even a little bit more interest. So I had another national news program in early May where I was coming from the home broadcast studio, and it looked really professional. It looked really cool. And the TV show producer was going, "Whoa, what have you put together there? And what can I learn from you?" And that's when I realized I was on the right track. I was really beginning to reinvent what I could do. I also experimented a little bit along the line with what I called Studio 2. It was a little sort of side stage where I could sit there and talk about some issues and do it with a close-up shot because I saw that's what a lot of people were doing. Another idea that didn't work. I abandoned it after several weeks because it really wasn't doing what I wanted to do. What I really wanted to do was I wanted to do in my green screen studio what I used to do on stage, and that was provide compelling content, deep insight, a dramatic look into the future with innovative insight as to what we need to do to align ourselves to the future, but to do that in the confines of this small space. And I searched and searched and searched for an answer, and one day the answer came into the door in the form of a 35 millimeter wide angle lens. My oldest son, came to visit us one weekend. We were finally out of quarantine. It was our very first visit. And aside from the moment of emotion where we were able to hug him for the very first time in months, I also made sure that he brought along the wide angle lens that I gave him a number of years before. And what we did was we plugged it into a camera, and I put that camera in the studio, and I put a green carpet, a green blanket down on the floor, and we turned it on, and I had some music playing in the background, and I walked out and I had a look, and magic happened. Here's the shot of what occurred in that moment. A brilliant moment where everything changed for me in terms of what I could actually do. Walking out on the floor, and I had a floor. I had the opportunity to build out my virtual set with the type of world that I existed in before. And I'm going to share with you this clip because I had Pink Floyd of where he could take the studio in the future. And that was it. I had a floor. And what I wanted to do was I wanted to have a stage, a backdrop like this. I wanted to be able to take the 25 years of experience that I developed by walking out on the big Las Vegas stages and somehow recreate that in my little space in my basement downstairs. And I began looking around all these stage sets, and I began looking around at what I could do. And I invested in new cameras, some new lights, some new stage sets, and I suddenly discovered I could actually do this thing. I remember the day that I actually did my first show where I had that big dramatic stage set, and I walked out and I did my little show, 10, 15 minutes long, on how to reinvent yourself for the future, and just watched the first 30, 45 seconds because I realized that I could share my insight and the need that people have for this insight from this dramatic new forum. Futurist Jim Carroll from the home broadcast studio. Here's a reality. Some people watch the future happen. Other people make the future happen. What type of person do you choose to be? Because we live in an era of absolutely relentless change. And right now, you need to make the decisions as to what you are going to do to reinvent yourself. So about 4 months in, I really found my groove. I've got all these stage sets. I've developed the capability to wander out and share a message, and I'm actually getting bookings from a variety of clients. Not only that, I was able to put together a couple of speaker promotional videos, which put in perspective the virtual work I've been doing. And that's what's critical for a speaker in this big global world. You need to be able to showcase what it is you can accomplish. Not only that, I'm doing a series of leadership videos for organizations, and I've got a promotional clip that I was able to develop around that with the assistance of my overseas producer. And I'm actually just finishing off a 15-minute video for a major global insurance conference, which will roll out next week, part of which happened in the green screen studio here. I've been doing interactive sessions with interactive Q&A. I mean, it's all magical. It's amazing how far I've been able to come in a matter of 6 months, and getting it all happening down here in my virtual broadcast studio, where I'm the only guy in charge and the only guy doing it. But a lot of the support comes from my wife. We're a team. And over the weekend, we took the studio apart. I've always looked at the other 2 walls down here, and I thought, well, a little bit more in terms of camera angle, a little bit more in terms of camera shots, maybe we could do something. So we tore it apart. She painted the walls. We rebuilt it. And here we are today. And I've got even more dramatic new capabilities. In a matter of 6 months, I've gone from having a simple little backdrop image to massively fascinating, complex virtual stage presentations with a lot of special effects, backed up by the content that I've always been delivering on stage, and doing it with a lot of amazing high-tech gear. Where every once in a while I wander in and I have a look around and I kind of go, wow, this is absolutely fascinating. And this studio has actually become my happy place as I work to reinvent myself for this future. Just like this teacher, 62 years old, never done anything in terms of virtual, never done anything in terms of Zoom, never done anything really online, but she wanted to accomplish it. And I saw the picture of where she was posting that I'm actually doing it today. And so here we are, 6 months in. All I've got is I've got my green wall, I've got my canvas of creativity. This is where I can do everything in terms of reinventing myself for the future, reinventing where I can go next. It's absolutely fascinating. If you aren't busy reinventing yourself, you're not doing the right stuff, because we're going to be in this world for quite some time. The virus, COVID-19, is not going to magically disappear overnight. The meeting and event industry as we know it is dead, but there is still a compelling need for leadership insight, innovation insight, trends insight, in terms of what comes next and what we need to do about it. So I'm reinventing myself to deliver that insight down here. It's working, the gigs are coming in. I hope you're doing the same type of thing. Thank you for watching, and I hope you watch the next 6 months, 1 year, 2 years, 5 years, as this adventure continues to unfold. Futurist Jim Carroll.